Do you remember the cheap dinners that somehow fed a whole family and still tasted like love? In the 1970s, Black families turned the simplest ingredients into meals filled with pride and care. What if those plates held more than food but a story of survival? Neckbone stew was the dish that made patience taste like home. Grandparents started it early, browning the bones slow until the house filled with the smell of salt, pepper, and smoke. The meat was tough at first, but they knew that time could turn even the hardest cuts tender. A pot of onions, celery, and carrots followed, simmering until the broth grew deep and rich. The bones gave flavor to everything they touched, the fat melting into gold that coated every spoonful. Sometimes potatoes joined the mix, sometimes rice, but the heart of the dish was always the same, making something out of what others overlooked. The stew bubbled for hours, humming low like a hymn on the stove. By supper, the meat slipped free from the bone, soft and ready. It fed everyone, from children to elders, warming stomachs and spirits alike. Neckbone stew was not just food, it was proof that care could turn scarcity into comfort. Every bite held a memory of waiting, stirring, tasting, and sharing. It taught that good things come slow and that nothing was ever too little when cooked with love. In every bowl lived the story of endurance, flavor, and faith that kept families strong through every hard season. Lima beans and rice were the heartbeat of humble suppers. The dry beans soaked overnight in cool water, swelling with promise. The next morning, they simmered with onions, salt, and sometimes a scrap of ham or a spoon of lard for flavor. The smell drifted through small kitchens, soft and soothing, like the memory of peace. When the beans turned creamy, rice joined the plate, a mound of comfort waiting to catch every drop of the broth. It was food that filled you without fuss, a steady meal that kept the body strong and the soul calm. Grandparents stirred it slow, never wasting a grain or bean. The dish stretched across days, reheated, shared, and remembered. Each bite was a reminder that survival could taste good, that frugality did not mean lack. Lima beans and rice were the taste of balance, simple, complete, and deeply human. When money was thin and work was long, this was the dinner that never failed, a pot of patience feeding everyone who came hungry. Turkey necks with gravy turned what many ignored into something worth craving. Grandparents browned the necks first, letting them sizzle in a pan until the air filled with a smoky richness. A bit of flour, water, and thyme turned the drippings into thick brown gravy that coated every piece like velvet. The meat cooked for hours until it slipped clean off the bone, tender and rich with flavor. Served over rice or mashed potatoes, it looked simple but tasted like a feast. The necks may have been cheap, but the love behind them was priceless. Grandparents made the most of what they had, and this meal proved their creativity and care. The gravy was the best part, seasoned just right, spooned generously so nothing went to waste. Everyone at the table ate slow, grateful for the warmth, the smell, and the moment. It was Sunday flavor on a weekday budget, the taste of making do without feeling poor. Turkey necks with gravy were more than a meal. They were a celebration of resilience and resourcefulness that lived in every kitchen where pride cooked alongside hunger. Fried mackerel fillets brought the sea to the table without breaking the bank. Grandparents bought them salted, sometimes canned, sometimes fresh if the market was kind. Each fillet was rinsed, dried, then dredged in cornmeal seasoned with pepper and a touch of cayenne. When they hit the hot grease, the kitchen came alive with crackles and curls of steam. The fish fried golden brown, the smell sharp and inviting. Served with grits, collard greens, or a slice of cornbread, it was a full meal made from little. The first bite carried crunch, then warmth, then salt that lingered like the memory of the coast. Children learned to eat carefully, picking around the small bones with patience. For many, fried mackerel was the taste of survival and skill, of knowing how to turn thrift into comfort. It was eaten with laughter, with stories of better days and pride in how far they had come. Every piece told the truth that even a poor man's fish could taste like celebration when cooked with love. Gizzards and rice were the meal that taught flavor from labor. Tough at first, the gizzards demanded patience, cleaned, boiled, and seasoned before ever touching the skillet. Grandparents fried them slow with onions, letting the scent of pepper and grease build into something irresistible. Once tender, they met a pot of rice, plain but proud, soaking up all that savory juice. It was not fancy, but it was rich in spirit, feeding families that refused to waste a thing. Gizzards, the part most people threw away, became the centerpiece of a dinner that stuck to the ribs. The sound of the knife chopping, the hiss of the pan, the quiet hum of the stove, all of it felt like music in a home where nothing came easy but everything was earned. It was dinner built from wisdom, not wealth. Each bite carried gratitude and grit, proof that poverty never lacked flavor. Pinto bean soup was the meal that made hard times taste soft. Grandparents soaked the beans overnight, letting them swell in tin pots while they slept. The next morning, onions, salt, and sometimes a small ham bone went into the water. The kitchen filled with the slow rhythm of simmering, a sound of hope that things would stretch one more day. The broth thickened as it cooked, rich with starch and strength. The smell alone could calm an empty stomach. Sometimes they crushed cornbread into the bowl, letting it soak up every drop. It was food that filled and comforted, humble yet full of soul. Pinto bean soup did not need meat or luxury to matter. It only needed time and patience. Grandparents called it a working man's stew, but it was more than that. It was a reminder that no meal made with love was ever small. Smothered chicken backs were proof that nothing went to waste in a smart kitchen. The backs were the cheapest part of the bird, bony and overlooked, but in careful hands they became tender miracles. Grandparents fried them first in a cast-iron pan, browning the skin to perfection. The drippings turned into gravy, flour, water, and a slow stir until thick and golden. The chicken went back in, simmering until the meat slipped off the bone and the gravy clung to every piece. The smell was deep and familiar, the kind that pulled everyone to the table. A pot of rice sat nearby, waiting to catch all that flavor. It was food born from thrift, yet full of pride. Every bite told the same story, of making do, of feeding many from a little, of turning scraps into something worthy of thanks. Fried bologna sandwiches were the weeknight heroes of the kitchen. Bologna hit the hot skillet with a sizzle, the edges curling like petals as it browned. Grandparents flipped each slice just once, careful not to burn the good parts. The smell was sharp, salty, and rich, filling the house faster than the hunger could. White bread waited on the counter, sometimes toasted, sometimes soft, and mustard or hot sauce turned it into magic. When money ran short, this sandwich saved the day. It was fast, filling, and full of character. Kids loved the crunch at the edge, the way the heat softened the bread just enough to make it melt in your hands. Grown folks knew it for what it was, a humble blessing. Fried bologna sandwiches tasted like memory and invention, like comfort built on what little was left. Cabbage and smoked sausage was the one-pot wonder that could feed a crowd. A single sausage link, sliced thin, was all it took to flavor an entire head of cabbage. Grandparents threw it all in a big pot with onions, pepper, and a spoon of grease. The cabbage wilted slow, its pale green turning gold in the steam. The smell filled every corner of the house, warm and inviting. Served with rice or cornbread, it made a full meal out of scraps. Each bite was smoky, sweet, and soft, the taste of making enough for everyone. It was not fancy, but it was always filling. Even when the sausage was barely there, its flavor carried through the whole dish. It was the kind of food that brought everyone to the table and kept them grateful. Salmon croquettes were the feast that came from a can. Grandparents mixed canned salmon with chopped onions, a little cornmeal, and an egg to hold it together. The mixture sizzled in the pan, forming golden patties that smelled like celebration. Outside, they were crisp and brown, inside, soft and savory. Served with grits or bread, they turned an ordinary night into something special. Kids called them fish cakes and ate them fast, the crunch echoing across the table. Sometimes a bit of hot sauce went on top for heat, sometimes ketchup for sweetness. No matter how they were served, they were always gone before they cooled. Salmon croquettes proved that flavor came from creativity, not cost. They were rich with pride and memory, the taste of survival wrapped in golden crust. Rice and gravy suppers were the soul of weeknight dinners, simple and satisfying. Grandparents browned whatever they had, chicken scraps, neck bones, or even onions alone, to make a base for the gravy. The drippings told the story, turning flour and water into gold. The smell was deep and comforting, rising from the pan like a promise. Hot rice waited patiently in a pot nearby, ready to soak up every drop. It was not fancy, but it was enough to fill every stomach and calm every worry. The first spoonful always tasted like home, salty and rich, carrying the flavor of care. When times were lean, the gravy was thin, but the love stayed thick. Every plate was scraped clean, nothing left behind. It was the dinner that kept families steady, warm, and thankful. Proof that comfort did not need luxury, just a stove, some rice, and a little faith. It fed more than hunger. It fed hope. Grandparents knew that a good pot of gravy could fix most of life's small troubles. Sometimes it was made with leftover roast or chicken drippings saved from the night before. Other times it was built from nothing more than fat and flour, stirred until the color turned perfect. The magic was in the patience, the slow whisk, the right smell, the moment it thickened. In that moment, the kitchen turned into a place of peace. Pig feet with hot sauce turned thrift into celebration. The feet simmered for hours in a big pot with onions, vinegar, and pepper, until the meat turned tender enough to slip from the bone. The air grew thick with spice and memory, the kind of smell that called everyone to the kitchen. Grandparents served them steaming, with hot sauce on the side and cornbread ready to catch the juices. The flavor was bold, rich, and full of soul, a taste that made you pause and savor. It was food for gatherings, for laughter, for long nights spent together. Every bite was messy, sticky, and worth the wait. Pig feet taught patience and appreciation, reminding everyone that nothing in the kitchen should ever be wasted. In every pot boiled the lesson that hard work and good seasoning could turn even the humblest cut into something to be proud of. It was a dish that didn't hide its roots. It celebrated them. Families would sit shoulder to shoulder, wiping their hands between bites, laughing at stories told for the 100th time. The sound of bones clinking against plates was its own kind of music. The hot sauce gave each bite a spark, a fire that matched the spirit of the people who made it. Cornbread and buttermilk was the quiet comfort that ended many long days. Grandparents crumbled leftover cornbread into big bowls, then poured cool buttermilk over the top until it softened. The tang met the sweetness of the corn, creating a flavor that felt like home. It was eaten slow, with a spoon, sometimes in silence, sometimes between stories. No stove was needed, no fancy ingredients, just what the house already had. It was breakfast, supper, or a midnight snack, dependable and kind. The meal cooled the body in summer and soothed the soul in winter. It reminded families that simplicity had its own kind of richness. Grandparents said it tasted best after a hard day's work, when hunger met gratitude. Cornbread and buttermilk was proof that the simplest things often held the most heart. The sound of the spoon scraping the bowl was steady, familiar, and peaceful. It was the kind of food you didn't rush, the kind that let the day fall away while you ate. Children grew up watching their elders eat it, learning that comfort didn't need sugar or spice, just love and something made by hand. Okra and tomatoes were the colors of the garden cooked into a pot. Grandparents sliced fresh okra, juicy and green, and stirred it with tomatoes and onions in bacon grease. The smell was sharp and earthy, filling the house with the scent of summer. The okra thickened the stew, the tomatoes gave it brightness, and a sprinkle of pepper tied it all together. Sometimes it was served over rice, sometimes eaten with cornbread, but always with pride. It was a dish that celebrated what the land could give, even when money could not. Every bite carried sunlight, soil, and sweat. The taste of labor turned into comfort. It was simple, yes, but it spoke of tradition, of survival, and of joy found in small harvests. The colors in the pot looked like a painting, red and green, bright and alive. The first spoonful always carried the warmth of the garden, a reminder that nourishment didn't come from the store but from the earth and the hands that worked it. Grandparents said this was food that told the truth about life: hard work, patience, and reward. Fried catfish. Fridays were the highlight of the week, a reward after days of work. The fish was cleaned, seasoned, and dredged in cornmeal before meeting the hot grease. The crackle of the oil was music in the kitchen, a sound everyone knew meant dinner was near. The smell drifted outside, pulling in neighbors and cousins alike. Plates were filled with fried catfish, hush puppies, and maybe some coleslaw if there was time. Grandparents said grace, then everyone dug in, hands and laughter flying. It was food for the spirit, food for community, food for faith. Fried catfish Fridays were not about wealth. They were about togetherness, joy, and pride in what could be made from so little. The meal was a celebration of ending the week strong, a tradition that turned simple fish into a feast. The crispy edges crunched, the inside melted soft, and the taste carried generations of memory. For many, this dinner meant the start of the weekend, a time to gather, to rest, and to give thanks for making it through another week. It was Southern joy served hot from the skillet. Canned tuna casserole brought the 1970s pantry to life. A single can of tuna, a can of cream soup, a handful of noodles, and a little imagination turned into something hearty and warm. Grandparents stirred it all together, added a sprinkle of breadcrumbs on top, and baked it until it bubbled golden. The smell of the oven filled the house with comfort and memory. It was a one-pan miracle that fed everyone without complaint. Kids loved the creamy texture. Adults loved that it stretched the grocery dollar. Tuna casserole was proof that convenience could still taste like care, that even in hard times a meal could feel special. Every bite carried the warmth of family and the cleverness of making do. It was the kind of dish that filled the kitchen with chatter, laughter, and the clinking of spoons. The top crust gave a little crunch, while the inside stayed silky and rich. It felt like a feast, even when made from cans and boxes. Some families added peas or onions for color. Others topped it with crushed crackers instead of breadcrumbs. However it was made, it never failed to satisfy. It reminded everyone that even small things, when cooked with heart, could feel like abundance. Collard greens with ham hocks simmered slow and proud, the pot working as long as the day. Grandparents washed each leaf by hand, folding them into the pot with care. The ham hock gave just enough salt and smoke to flavor every bite. The greens wilted down into something tender, deep, and full of life. The smell filled the house, steady and strong, like a heartbeat. Cornbread waited nearby to soak up the potlikker, the broth rich with flavor and history. This was food that comforted, that healed, that reminded families where they came from. It was simple, but it carried power, and that made it sacred. Collard greens with ham hocks were a hymn cooked in a pot, a prayer whispered over the stove. Grandparents taught the younger ones to taste the broth before it finished, adding a pinch of pepper or vinegar if needed. Everyone had their own way of making it, but the feeling was always the same. The greens brought people together over stories, songs, and shared plates. Eating them was more than habit, it was heritage. In every spoonful was the echo of hands that had picked, washed, and cooked for generations before. Chitterlings, or chitlins, were not for the faint-hearted but for those who knew the meaning of respect. Grandparents cleaned them for hours, boiling them slow to soften the tough cuts. The smell was strong, but so was the pride that came with cooking them right. They seasoned them heavy with vinegar, pepper, and patience. Served hot with cornbread or rice, they were a delicacy born from struggle and tradition. Every bite told a story of survival, of making use of what others threw away and turning it into something sacred. It was a dish tied to heritage, to memory, to the rhythm of the South. Chitlins were not just food. They were legacy on a plate. They took courage to cook and love to appreciate. Families gathered around pots that steamed like offerings, the kitchen alive with heat and history. It was the kind of meal that demanded work but gave back in pride. For many, chitlins were a reminder of ancestors who had done much with little, who found dignity in the act of feeding their own. Eating them was not just tradition, it was a way of honoring everything that came before. Baked macaroni and cheese was the crown jewel of Sunday dinner. Grandparents mixed cooked noodles with milk, cheese, and eggs, baking it until the top turned golden brown and crispy. The edges were everyone's favorite, chewy and rich, the middle creamy and soft. The smell drifted through the house like a celebration. It was a dish that took time, one made for gathering and sharing. Even when the cheese was rationed or stretched, it always tasted like abundance. It was food for holidays, homecomings, and hope. Each forkful carried history and heart, a promise that love could be baked and served in a single pan. When the bubbling cheese hit the air, it was like joy announcing itself. Families waited eagerly for the first slice, everyone reaching for the crispy corners. Grandparents might add a touch of paprika on top or mix in bits of leftover meat to make it stretch further. It was a meal that brought people together, a warm, bubbling symbol of comfort and care. No matter the circumstance, baked macaroni and cheese made every table feel like home. Beef liver and onions were the weekday hero, the meal that fed a family for pennies. Grandparents sliced the liver thin, dredged it in flour, and seared it in a hot skillet. Onions caramelized beside it, sweet and soft, cutting the richness of the meat. The smell was deep and earthy, the taste bold and full. Served with rice or mashed potatoes, it was food that strengthened bodies and taught appreciation. Kids might wrinkle their noses, but they ate it all the same, knowing it kept them strong. Beef liver and onions were nourishment, not luxury. Honest food made with honest work. The sizzle of the pan was a sound of perseverance, of making something nourishing out of what little money could buy. Grandparents knew how long to cook it, just enough to keep it tender, never tough. A drizzle of gravy sometimes finished the dish, soaking into everything on the plate. It was hearty, iron-rich, and reliable, the taste of care disguised as simplicity. Every bite was a reminder that meals did not need to impress to matter. They only needed to sustain. Navy bean and ham soup was the taste of patience and thrift wrapped in warmth. Grandparents started with a leftover ham bone, letting it simmer low until every bit of flavor seeped into the pot. Dried navy beans soaked overnight, softening in water before joining the bubbling broth. The smell filled the house, rich and smoky, carrying the promise of comfort. Onions, celery, and carrots followed, chopped fine and stirred in slowly. The soup thickened as the beans broke down, turning creamy without needing milk or cream. A pinch of salt, a dash of pepper, and sometimes a splash of vinegar completed the work. Every spoonful tasted like effort rewarded, like turning scraps into something generous. The ham bone gave more than meat. It gave depth, heart, and memory. Served with cornbread or crackers, it was a meal that stretched for days. It was humble but mighty, a pot that represented everything right about Southern kitchens. Resourcefulness, care, and love passed from hand to hand, meal to meal. Canned sardine grits bowls were a dish for days when the cupboard seemed empty, but the will to eat well remained strong. Grandparents opened the tin, the sharp, salty scent of sardines hitting first. They fried the fish lightly in the skillet with onions or peppers if they had them, crisping the edges until golden. Meanwhile, a pot of grits bubbled on the stove, thick and smooth, stirred with a heavy hand to keep it from sticking. The two came together in a bowl, grits soft and buttery beneath, sardines rich and smoky on top. Hot sauce was often the final touch, adding just enough heat to balance the salt. It was a poor man's meal with a rich man's satisfaction, a combination that made sense only to those who had lived it. For many families, it was breakfast, dinner, and survival, proof that pride and creativity never left the kitchen, no matter how hard times got. Cabbage and potato hash made vegetables taste like victory. Grandparents diced cabbage thin and cut potatoes thick, tossing them together in a skillet slick with bacon grease. The sound of sizzling filled the room, the smell of pepper and salt pulling everyone closer. The cabbage softened while the potatoes browned, the two becoming inseparable in flavor. It was hearty enough to be supper and simple enough to be breakfast the next morning. Sometimes onions or a bit of leftover sausage found their way in, but it never needed much to shine. The magic was in the texture, crispy edges giving way to soft centers, each bite earthy and warm. It was a one-pan wonder that stretched groceries and spirits alike. No waste, no worry, just food that filled the stomach and soothed the soul. It reminded everyone that plenty was not about money but about knowing how to make something out of nearly nothing. Chicken and dumplings turned one bird into a pot of miracles. Grandparents started by boiling the chicken slow, pulling every ounce of flavor from the bones. Once tender, the meat was shredded and dropped back into a broth thickened with flour and care. The dumplings came next, soft bits of dough rolled or dropped straight from the spoon, puffing up as they cooked. The steam filled the kitchen, carrying the scent of comfort and tradition. It was a dish that fed the body and quieted the mind, one that could stretch across days if rationed right. Every bowl was creamy, savory, and satisfying, the kind of food that made silence fall at the table except for the sound of spoons. Chicken and dumplings were more than dinner. They were love made tangible, a reminder that warmth could come from even the humblest ingredients. It was Southern grace in edible form, rich in history, heart, and home. Fried cornmeal mush was the golden gift of leftovers reborn. Grandparents cooked cornmeal with water and salt until thick, then poured it into pans to cool overnight. By morning, it was firm enough to slice into thick slabs, each piece ready to fry in a hot skillet. The edges crisped, the insides stayed creamy, and the smell filled the air like a memory of simpler days. Butter melted on top, sometimes followed by a drizzle of syrup or a sprinkle of sugar, turning plain cornmeal into a treat. Served with eggs, beans, or even gravy, it fit any meal, any hour, any hunger. It was resourcefulness turned into art, yesterday's scraps becoming today's comfort. The sizzle in the pan was the sound of care and cleverness, proof that no bit of effort ever went wasted. Fried cornmeal mush carried the story of families who made do and made joy from what they had. Stuffed bell peppers with rice and ground beef were the height of homemade ingenuity. Grandparents hollowed out the peppers, filling them with a mixture of rice, meat, onions, and tomato sauce. The smell of them baking drifted through the house, sweet and savory all at once. Each pepper stood tall in the pan, bubbling at the edges, the sauce thickening into something rich. A single pound of ground beef could feed 6 this way, stretched with rice and patience. The first bite was tender and bursting with warmth, the peppers soft, but still holding shape. It was a meal that looked like celebration even when it was born of thrift. The colors, red, green, gold, made the table shine. Families remembered this dish for its generosity, how one pan could satisfy everyone. Stuffed bell peppers were proof that good food came from balance, between work and love, between effort and the reward of a full belly. Hoppin' John was a dish of faith and fortune, a meal that carried meaning beyond hunger. Grandparents made it every New Year's Day, believing black-eyed peas brought luck, rice brought wealth, and together they promised hope. A ham hock or bit of bacon flavored the pot, giving smoke and salt to the peas. The rice was cooked right in the same broth, soaking up every drop of flavor. When it was done, the house smelled like new beginnings, earthy, rich, and full of possibility. It was simple, but it felt special, eaten with laughter, prayer, and cornbread on the side. Even after the holiday passed, Hoppin' John found its way back to tables, feeding bodies and traditions alike. It reminded families that good fortune came from gratitude, that the act of eating together was itself a blessing. Every bowl was both a meal and a wish whispered over the new year. Stewed pig ears and beans were the taste of memory, slow cooked until soft and rich. Grandparents boiled the ears first to clean them, then simmered them with beans, onions, and garlic for hours. The broth grew thick and flavorful, the beans soaking up every drop of smoky essence. A little hot sauce or vinegar added brightness at the end. It was food that tested patience but rewarded it deeply. Each bite was tender, savory, and layered with history. What others saw as scraps, families saw as sustenance, a connection to generations that made survival a craft. Served with rice or bread, it filled the table with warmth and gratitude. Stewed pig ears and beans were a lesson in respect, for food, for work, for what came before. Every bowl reminded people that nothing was ever wasted when cooked with heart. It was the past kept alive through flavor and faith. Homemade vegetable soup was a patchwork of everything left behind. Grandparents threw together wilted greens, carrot ends, onion skins, and any leftover meat bones into a single pot. Water turned to broth as it simmered, slowly pulling life from scraps. The smell was clean and comforting, like the promise of one more good meal. Sometimes rice or noodles joined in, stretching it further. Every spoonful tasted different, some bites rich with beans, others bright with tomato or herbs. The soup was never the same twice, but it was always satisfying. It was the kitchen's way of saying nothing goes to waste, everything has purpose. Served hot on cold nights, it filled not just the stomach but the spirit. Homemade vegetable soup was the flavor of perseverance, a quiet declaration that hunger could always be met with creativity, care, and community, one steaming bowl at a time. Cornmeal-crusted fried pork chops were a celebration of texture and taste. Grandparents dredged the chops in seasoned cornmeal, pressing it tight before dropping them into bubbling grease. The sizzle was loud and promising, the smell enough to make mouths water across the house. The crust turned golden and crisp, the meat inside juicy and tender. Each chop came out shining with pride, ready to be served beside mashed potatoes or collard greens. The first bite crackled, then melted into pure comfort. Even when meat was rare, this dish made dinner feel abundant. It was a meal of love, labor, and satisfaction, the kind that made families linger at the table long after the plates were empty. Cornmeal-crusted fried pork chops were proof that good food was not about wealth, but about will, about taking what you had and making it beautiful. It was soul food in every sense of the word. Chinquapin nut cakes offered small moments of sweetness created from the rich forests of the American South. The chinquapin, a dwarf chestnut native to the region, produced small, sweet nuts that could be eaten raw or roasted. Enslaved families collected these nuts in autumn, cracked their shells, and ground the meat into a fine meal. Mixed with a little cornmeal, honey, or molasses when available, the nut meal formed small cakes that were baked or cooked on a griddle until golden brown. These cakes carried both nutrition and a sense of celebration, providing rare treats for special gatherings. The flavor, slightly sweeter than a chestnut with a buttery finish, became a cherished memory passed down through generations. Even after emancipation, chinquapin nuts remained a prized wild harvest in Appalachian and southern communities, though the trees have grown scarce in modern times. Chinquapin nut cakes remind us of the connection between forest abundance and human creativity, transforming a foraged ingredient into a dessert that honored both the landscape and the people who carefully tended its secrets. Molasses stacked cake graced weddings and homecomings with a sweetness born of patience and skill. Thin layers of spiced cake were baked individually, then stacked high with a rich molasses filling that soaked into the crumb as the dessert rested overnight. The dark syrup lent a deep flavor that spoke of both Caribbean cane fields and southern kitchens. Families often baked the layers days ahead, turning the assembly into a festive gathering where aunts and cousins worked side by side. Each slice told a story of celebration and endurance, for molasses was affordable and plentiful even when other sweeteners were scarce. The cake's tall, impressive stature made it a centerpiece on tables decorated for special occasions, a symbol of abundance even in lean times. Today, few households take the time to roll, bake, and stack so many delicate layers, and the recipe lives mostly in old family cookbooks. Those who have tasted it know the quiet triumph of a dessert that rewards effort with lasting memory. Sorghum syrup biscuits with milk were the kind of dinner that showed how families found sweetness even in struggle. Sorghum syrup, cheaper than sugar, was kept in jars that seemed to last forever, poured generously over hot biscuits fresh from the oven. My grandmother baked the biscuits with flour and lard, ingredients that could be stretched and shared across multiple meals. Once the biscuits were ready, she split them open, drizzled them with syrup, and served them with cold milk poured into glasses. It was simple but filling, providing enough energy for tired workers and growing children. The sweetness of the syrup turned plain flour biscuits into something that felt like a treat, even if it was just supper. In the 1960s, this kind of meal reminded families that comfort did not always need meat or elaborate dishes. It was about making do with what was on hand and finding joy in it. Sorghum syrup biscuits with milk were a reminder that sweetness could soften the edge of hardship. Okra fritters, also known as okra cakes, offered crisp golden edges and a tender interior that celebrated the summer garden. Fresh okra pods were chopped fine, mixed with cornmeal, onions, and a dash of pepper, then spooned into hot oil until each patty puffed and browned. Sold at fish fries, church picnics, and traveling fairs, these fritters were easy to eat by hand and full of flavor that tied African heritage to southern soil. The okra gave a subtle sweetness and a soft binding that kept the patties moist, while the cornmeal crust provided satisfying crunch. Children waited impatiently beside bubbling skillets, hoping for the first fritter to cool enough to taste. Vendors wrapped them in newspaper cones so families could stroll through evening air scented with music and spice. Modern snack foods have replaced these handcrafted treats, but those who remember the sound of oil popping and the taste of garden-fresh okra know the fritters carried more than flavor. They held the joy of gathering and the pride of turning humble crops into a festival of taste. Ground pumpkin seed. Porridge transformed leftover seeds into a hearty meal that supplied both protein and healthy oils. After pumpkins were cooked for pies or stews, the seeds were washed, dried, and pounded into a coarse meal. This meal was simmered slowly in water or thin milk, creating a creamy porridge with a subtle nutty flavor. Sweetened lightly with honey or molasses when available, it became a sustaining breakfast or evening dish that used every part of the harvest. The method reflected West African culinary traditions where ground seeds thickened soups and stews, showing how transplanted knowledge enriched American foodways. Generations after emancipation, pumpkin seed porridge remained a seasonal specialty in some rural areas, appreciated for its nourishing qualities and gentle taste. Modern cooks might recognize it in contemporary seed-based milks and cereals, proving that this centuries-old practice still influences how we eat today. Ground pumpkin seed. Porridge highlights the wisdom of never wasting what nature provides and celebrates a heritage of careful resourcefulness that continues to inspire. Cornbread dressing was the kind of side dish that never stayed on the side. It was the soul of Sunday dinners and holiday tables, baked golden and rich with sage, onions, and broth. Grandparents made it from scratch, crumbling day-old cornbread by hand and stirring in whatever they had, sometimes bits of chicken, sometimes just love. The smell alone could make you stop mid-step and breathe it in. It was dense yet soft, buttery but never heavy, and it always seemed to stretch just far enough to feed one more plate. In a time when nothing was wasted, this dish was how people turned leftovers into luxury. Every scoop came with the memory of crowded kitchens and laughter spilling from one room to the next. It was more than food. It was ceremony, care, and continuity baked into one pan. Cornbread dressing held families together long before anyone called it tradition. Wild grape connected plantation kitchens to the native abundance of the American South. Muscadine and scuppernong grapes grew untended along fences and forest edges, providing a dependable late summer harvest. Enslaved workers gathered the clusters and crushed them by hand to create a tangy juice that could be fermented slightly for a refreshing drink or boiled into a syrupy must used to season grains and greens. This technique echoed West African traditions of using fruit reductions to brighten savory dishes. After emancipation, muscadine wine and homemade grape jellies became hallmarks of Southern foodways, and small farms still produce them today. The careful gathering and slow simmering required patience and skill, qualities that defined the cooking of those who made the most of every wild resource. Wild grape stands as both a practical recipe and a testament to how African American cooks merged Old World techniques with New World ingredients, leaving a flavor that continues to shape regional preserves and beverages across the Carolinas and Georgia. Field pea salad with hot pepper vinegar offered a cool bite for the hottest southern evenings. Tender field peas were boiled until just soft, then chilled and tossed with diced onions, sweet peppers, and a splash of sharp vinegar infused with fiery peppers. The salad balanced earthy legumes with a bright tang that woke the palate after long days in the sun. Served on wide porches as cicadas sang, it accompanied fried chicken, grilled fish, or simply a hunk of cornbread. Home gardeners prized field peas for their reliability in poor soil, and the vinegar peppers were often homemade, steeped for weeks in glass bottles on sunny windowsills. Guests at summer suppers remembered the sting of the vinegar and the gentle sweetness of the peas as the taste of true Southern hospitality. Today, packaged beans and bottled dressings have replaced the careful soaking and seasoning that once defined the dish, but the memory of its crisp, refreshing bite lingers in kitchens where tradition still holds strong. Stewed okra with cornmeal dumplings was a dish that blended frugality with comfort in a way that stuck with families for decades. Okra, often grown in backyard gardens, went into a simmering pot with onions, tomatoes, and broth until it softened into a thick stew. My grandmother would mix simple cornmeal batter, drop spoonfuls into the bubbling pot, and let the dumplings cook until they puffed into tender bites. The texture of the okra thickened the stew naturally, giving it body without needing flour or cream. Each bowl carried the flavor of the garden, earthy and sustaining, with dumplings that filled the stomachs of tired workers. It was food that came straight from the soil and stretched further than its ingredients suggested. Children grew up eating this dish as a matter of routine, yet it became part of the rhythm of survival. In the 1960s, stewed okra with cornmeal dumplings was a staple that represented both thrift and ingenuity, turning humble vegetables and flour into something worthy of pride at the dinner table. Hand-pulled taffy candy brought winter nights alive with laughter and sticky hands. Families boiled sorghum or cane syrup with sugar until it reached the perfect glossy stage, then poured the hot mixture onto buttered slabs to cool slightly. Children and adults alike greased their palms and began the rhythmic pulling, stretching the warm candy until it turned light and airy. The kitchen filled with the sweet smell of caramel as ropes of taffy were twisted and cut into bite-sized pieces. It was as much about the gathering as the candy, a shared activity that warmed cold evenings and strengthened family ties. Neighbors might stop by to help, turning the process into a spontaneous party where stories and jokes flowed as freely as the sugary strands. Store-bought sweets eventually replaced the long, careful ritual, but the memory of shining taffy and joyful pulling remains vivid for those who once stood in the glow of a winter stove and felt the magic of homemade candy. Candied yams with brown sugar and butter were the sunshine of the dinner table. They glistened under the oven light, sweet enough to make children hover close and adults sneak a second spoonful. The yams were sliced thick, bathed in melted butter, brown sugar, and a touch of cinnamon, then baked until the edges caramelized and the syrup turned glossy. It was dessert disguised as a side dish, a holiday tradition that showed up even when times were lean. Sweet potatoes were easy to grow, affordable, and rich in comfort, making them a Southern staple long before store-bought sweets came along. Families treated them like a celebration of resourcefulness, how something grown in the ground could taste like grace itself. On Christmas morning or after church on Sunday, that first bite always tasted like home. No matter who made them, the smell was unmistakable, warm, rich, and heavy with memory. For grandparents, this dish was proof that sweetness could still be found in hard times, and for everyone who came after, it became a symbol of continuity. The taste lingered long after the plates were cleared, a quiet reminder that joy, like brown sugar, can rise out of the simplest things. Roasted chestnuts carried warmth and nourishment through the cold months when plantation rations were meager and gardens lay dormant. Enslaved families foraged chestnut trees that grew wild in the surrounding woods, gathering the smooth brown nuts and roasting them in hearth ashes or iron skillets until their shells cracked and the sweet flesh softened. The nuts' high energy content and natural sweetness made it an important source of calories and comfort, especially during long winter evenings. Roasted chestnuts became part of a wider African American food tradition, appearing in holiday celebrations and roadside markets after emancipation. Their gentle flavor paired well with cornmeal breads and simple stews, and many families passed down techniques for roasting and storing them long after the plantation era ended. Today, roasted chestnuts sold at winter festivals and city street corners carry echoes of that history, reminding us that what began as a survival practice also nurtured community and seasonal ritual for generations who transformed hardship into enduring culture. If these dinners brought back the smell of home, tell us your favorite in the comments, give this video a like, and subscribe so you never miss a taste of history served warm.